I think it's that time. For what? Another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Welcome back. It's your host, Gautam Yegapin, alive and blessed to present you with today's conversation. Stay thirsty for knowledge, and I guess some water too. I am so excited for today's conversation. We are speaking with Irina Lyublinskaya. She is a professor of mathematics and education at the Teachers College, Columbia University, with over 3 decades of experience in STEM education. Trained as a theoretical and mathematical physicist in the former Soviet Union, she brings a unique blend of scientific rigor and pedagogical innovation to her work. Her career spans continents, systems, and paradigms, positioning her as a leading voice in the integration of technology in science and mathematics classrooms. How are you doing today?
I'm very good. Thank you, Gautam. I'm pleased to be here and very excited about our conversation.
Yeah, we were just having such a lovely conversation. I feel, as a side note, I feel like one of my favorite things in any of these podcasts is just to get to know who the person is before we start recording. So it already feels like I'm speaking to a friend of some sort rather than a complete stranger. Because some of the hardest conversations will be where you have to jump right into the conversation because either someone's late or you're on a tight time schedule. So you're like, I don't know who you are, but I'm trying to, gain all these things. So I'm really glad I got to kind of get a decent glimpse of who you are before. But I think I love hearing people's origin stories and understanding how their entire intellectual journeys began because I think that initial seed is always so beautiful and profound to understand. But you grew up in the Soviet Union. I'm really curious, what was your early experiences like with physics and mathematics, and how did you kind of develop this fascination with these fields?
Well, it's a really good question because it's always interesting to look back, right, and see like how did it all happen. So first of all, I do want to mention that I grew up in a family where my both parents were very well educated, and as well as my grandparents. But they all came to the education in different ways. So I think that is important part of me, who I am. Like my grandfather actually had a PhD in electrical engineering on my mother's side, but he was not allowed to go to university because at that time in Soviet Union, if you were not of like a blue collar origin, you were discouraged from going to higher education. So did he studied on his own and then was able to get to graduate school without actually a university education, which is, I think, fascinating. And my grandmother was recruited to become a teacher. She was living in Ukraine in a small village, and there was a need for teachers. And as a matter of fact, it's like the the government sent people to the villages to recruit young people to become teachers. And so she came to Leningrad from that small village to become a teacher and became. And she told me always like she wanted to be a high school teacher, but she was so scared, so she decided to be elementary school teacher. So she was teaching Russian language, but in elementary school. And
Wow.
then both my parents got higher education, but my father was the first one in his family who got a college education. He grew up without a father um, who was killed during World War II, and his mother was a nurse in a hospital. Not like here a registered nurse, but more like a person who just takes care of the people without like education. So so in each generation, like in my family, I had like somebody who was a first in their family, and then somebody who was already like educated. And my dad went all the way, like he became an academician, and so I had a very strong family push for education. Like my family, and again, my father was chemical engineer, and my mom was electrical engineer, so we were a very STEM oriented family. And they pushed me very strongly, like in that push, I mean, like they pushed me to be good, but my interest started of like we had kids journals when I was like fourth, fifth, sixth grade. We had those kids journals, and they would put some mathematical puzzles in the journal. And I got very, very curious and interested in solving those puzzles. And I remember when I was sixth grade, they were talking about prime numbers and how there's no formula for prime numbers. And I got like so like dedicated, like I gotta find that formula, like I'm gonna spend my time. So, and I wrote like a try, and I came up with a formula for first 57 numbers and sent my like letter to that journal. And I got a real response from a mathematician who said that he encouraged me to, do more mathematics and suggested a book to read, which I got in the library and I read. So there was this interest, like even research mathematicians were really communicate with kids. And I think that kind of pushed me. And then I had really good teachers, really teachers who engaged us and who were like fun, but also like rigorous. So in that was mathematics. And physics, I had actually a pretty weak teacher in my like school, and my parents were worried that I'm not learning physics properly. And in Russia, we had so-called circles. I don't know if you heard. In Russian, it's called kruzhok. So these were like um, informal outside of the school, like places were free where you could go and where you can like the volunteers, usually like people who run them were volunteers, and very often they were like doctoral students or expert teachers or even faculty at the university, so even research mathematicians or physics. So I went to physics circle. There are also mathematics circles, and there would be like it was extracurricular, right? So after school you go, and this was where you would be presented like in a non-standard problem that was not like traditional like a school textbook problem, and you would debate about it and you would talk about it, and it was like a social environment. I think in a culture wise it was very similar to what sports here, like the sports team, but for us, it was like this mathematics teams, and we even had battles, math battles or physics battles there. Like where like you get to like hard problems. Who's gonna solve it like a team together first? So this were. And they all often invited professional mathematicians to talk to us. So it was this social environment, but it was really focused on um, this kind of imagination and innovation and a non-standard things which we didn't perceive as you're like you do the school thing and then you have a test, and then you do the school thing and you have a homework. And so that physics circle was instrumental in helping me to connect to other kids who were interested in that, but also to become really interested in physics. And in that circle, I learned about the specialized physics math school in my city in Leningrad. So, and I don't know if you're familiar with the whole story, but back in 50s, in 1950s, the government decided that children need to finish high schools with vacation, right? And so there's a lot of vocational schools created where they would become, like I don't know, it, some blue collar workers, right? The country needed people who can do stuff like build, like weld and all of that, like plumbers and so on. And then the researchers came up with the idea that STEM, the scientist is also vocation. To be a scientist is a vocation, and we need specialized schools for that. And so in end of 50s, early 60s, they created those specialized schools, which would draw kids after the eighth grade for 2 years and give expanded and more rich curriculum in the STEM. And so I went to physics, mathematics schools. We also had like in the city, biology, chemistry schools. And so that physics circle, they told us about the school, and I decided I want to go there because I got interested in physics. And I was always interested in mathematics. I loved math at that point, but then physics came as a new thing. And so I went to that school, and it was a very different environment. We had, first of all, usually in public regular schools, most teachers were women. In this schools, most teachers were men, which was already different from normal school. Then those people were not just our teachers, but they took us to, like, we had a hiking club, and the teacher took us to like for those trips. Like I went to Siberia in like this amazing trip in Altai mountains of our physics teacher, where we, like, for almost 3 weeks, we first hiked through the mountains, and then we were rafting on Siberian rivers. And in the winter, we went on a ski trip. So they were part of our life beyond the school. And like my physics teacher wrote me a song for my birthday because my birthday happened during that winter trip, like when we were skiing in the mountains. So so it was a very different environment that which and that physics teacher, I think, who really instilled even more interest for me to become a physicist and to go and study physics at university. So so that's how secondary, right, education, but then higher education. So we had a system where you had a lot of specialized, they called institutes, so like a Caltech or MIT, right? So like technical institute of different specialties. Like there was institute for let's say technological institute. Uh, there were like institute for electrical engineering. There was an institute for people who build railways. Like they were all very specialized. And then there were university, just a single university in the whole in our city. Was also university in Moscow, and like some major cities, like in every capital of republics, there was their own university. And university offered like a lot of departments, right, that were specialized, but the whole one organization. So I wanted to go to physics department of the Leningrad State University. This university is like one of the top, was at the time probably one of the top five in the country, and at that time probably one of the top 50 in the world. So very competitive. But I was coming from a school that was prepared us really well. Like we pretty much probably knew first 2 years of university curriculum already from that school. And I was a valedictorian of my school. But I'm also Jewish. So, which means that, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism at that time. Like they would fail you purposefully. Uh, Actually, like it's interesting that at that time, like I was pretty much told by my teachers, don't even try, like because it's just you'll be like frustrated, you may get some health issues, like it just would be very, very difficult. So, and most of my friends who were Jewish didn't even try. They went to one of the Polytechnic University or like electrical engineering, I mean, institute at that time. So, but I was stubborn. So I decided to try anyway. And so it was a very, very dramatic experience with a lot of pressure on me. I was only like, what, 17? A lot of unfair, I would say, treatment and so on, but I did get in. There were 90, there was 300 spots at the physics department of Leningrad State University. There were 95 Jewish students who applied, and there were a bunch of others, of course. Only two were admitted. So there was two of us, me and another kid who was from another like specialized school in the city. So it was very dramatic, but I got in, and then after that, like I didn't feel any anti-Semitism while I was studying at the university. And of my interest in physics, I ended up to be in the group for theoretical physics. And it was a great experience, and I wanted to do research right away. And so I remember coming as a sophomore to a person whom was one of the professors of statistical physics, and that's what I wanted to do. And he told me, "Well, you're too early. Like you need to study. You don't know anything yet." And I'm like, "What do I need to learn?" He said, "Well, read this, and this book, and then come back." And I did, and I came back in my junior year. I said, "I'm ready." And so he this agreed to work with me. So I started in parallel to my classes, do some research, and actually published first paper when I was a senior at the university uh, on theoretical physics material. So my interest was in my dissertation eventually ended up to be in thin films, like it's like a quantum effects in the thin films. But anyway, so so this but the other part of our education, like which is very different from United States, for example, we didn't have general education. Like here, people for 2 years learn general education because all of that was part of our high school
Mm.
education. So when we came to physics, when I had physics, mathematics, English, because English was extremely important for physicists. You need to be able to read international literature. And then, of course, anything political. We had a lot of political subjects. That was mandatory. And we have physical education, which was also mandatory because we all had to be prepared to defend our country if, situation comes to that. So, but we didn't have like all the other things. Like here, students learn a lot of different things, and like even though it was called university, so specialization started much earlier. So that kind of very briefly, I guess, of my like
Yeah.
history of my education. So
Yeah. No, I mean, thanks for laying that out. I think something I've always wanted to do is, even as you were saying, it's in my ideal world, if I had all the time in the world, how I would want this entire podcast to be structured is I'd want 3 episodes where I just learn about the person speaking, and then the fourth episode would finally be about their ideas. I've recently been really fascinated by that because I've been in university, I learned about all these poets and authors and philosophers and mathematicians, and I was always so in awe with them because of their ideas. But now I've been much more curious about their lives, like how did they actually live? And there's this huge kind of contrast where I'm like, a lot of times the lives that people led were really difficult and actually quite tragic lives. But the things and the ideas they came up with were actually so profound and beautiful. But it seems like there's this disconnect that happens often in academia where you become only your ideas and there's no real reverence to the kind of journey or the context within which all of those ideas became generated. So I feel like even being able to hear for 10 minutes or so just what your journey was like brings so much curiosity out for me. And I'm like, I could just explore that forever. And then, and then you'd need a separate time to really go into the ideas themselves. But one of the things, it's interesting because every time we kind of in this show step into a new space, I am so ignorant and oblivious to so many things because there's no way to know about, for example, season 3, I covered a lot of indigenous perspectives to education. And I knew nothing. I mean, when I listen back to those first couple episodes, I'm still like I was so ignorant, and though I didn't leave knowing everything, I would say at least 1% more aware of what was happening, which is so huge. So similarly, I actually have very little context into uh, Russian history, the Soviet Union in general, just outside of a few things that I know from the history books that I've read, which I don't know even how much of that is true. And so I feel like I want to just learn a little bit more, I guess, about some of the philosophical underpinnings of education and what your kind of reflections are, having seen higher ed and just education in general in the United States versus the Soviet Union, which at that point had very different, ways of thinking about what the point of purpose of life was, what is your relationship to your country, so on and so forth. So I guess maybe we can just start there. When in your experience, when you would conceive what the point of all of this was, what was a good life, what was my education meant for, and what was I meant to do with my life, how did you kind of understand education in role of your kind of your goals or your outcomes that you wanted in life?
well, it's a good question. um, I do want to emphasize, like, I, in a sense, looking back, I had an elite education. Not because I'm coming from elite family or anything, but just because I was pushed in the right direction and I had an opportunity to be in one of the best schools and one of the best universities. And I had like incredible teachers. And I have friends who didn't have that experience. So if we separate, like, there was a mass education, right? And there was this specialized education that it was very different. There was a big contrast within the country. So for me personally, the education was to get on my feet to first of all to do what I love, right? Which not necessarily happens, and I did have through some path that I'm not doing exactly what I was learning to do and what I was expected to do, but it happens so that I love what I do anyway. But for me, it was also like my parents always told me that in order to reach anything, I have to do so much better than everybody around me because of the discrimination system existed that was existing in the Soviet Union against Jews. And uh, and so that also pushed me very hard to not just do something, oh, like for a check, but really to go deeper and being ready to address whatever challenges I may experience. And I had experienced quite a few when I was entering university, when I was trying to get a job after the university. So, and which eventually led to our immigration to the United States. But I wanted I wanted to do something which was creative. I wanted to be able to contribute to something new, something original, something that nobody did before. Um, I and in the research, like I got exposed to research as early as sixth grade. We had those circles I told you about. So I also went to circle which was called geobotanics or geographical botanics. And that group in that group they take you to the field, to that natural parks areas, and we would do some data collection and study things. And I was studying small rivers and how that relates to the flora and fauna, like what animals there, what plants are growing in the national parks in Soviet Union. And then we would write reports about it, and then the best reports would be submitted. We had those events for real, like for scientists and for industry in Moscow, like this huge like a state exhibit halls, right, where they would bring the best innovations, best discoveries. And then they had a section for kids where kids could uh, present or display the best research reports done by the children from all over the country. Something maybe similar to International Science Fair that happens here, but only for us it was not a competition, but it was like selection. Well, I guess selection is a competition, but it was presented in the same space where the adults' achievements. It was like the exhibit of achievements, right, of the country. And so my work was twice selected for that, which also gave me that confidence, and like a pride, but also confidence that I can do research because it was something new. And so that exposure, and then exposure to physics, and then a desire to do something new, and I saw how research can do that, led me to. That's why I so badly wanted to get to university, not at one of the institutes which were prepared more like a professional, like engineers, right, or professional technicians. I wanted to do science. I wanted to be a scientist. So
Yeah.
I think
I
that's yeah.
yeah, I guess I was just really curious because I feel again I'm stepping into territory that I don't know much about, but I feel the yearning to ask this question. But I feel like in a society where I personally identify myself as an individual and I'm like, okay, I need to thrive, I need to become successful, I need to do well. I don't really feel the necessary need to uplift those around me. So when you're in a classroom, your education in the States often feels, I think, very individual. It's about you succeeding in this mass of many other people. You're it's not like my entire class is being graded together or we're succeeding together. It's an individual journey. In a more communist kind of framework, is education much more communal? Is it you
Um.
know?
Okay. So like anything in life, right? It's not that simple. So like in a sense, like we had a cohort, right, approach everywhere through K through first grade to 10th grade. We only had 10 years of high schooling, right, and then for 6 years of higher education because we didn't have bachelor's degrees. You go straight for masters, and if you don't get it, you don't get anything. So, and there
Well,
was also cohort. So in that sense, you don't compete with each other. You really work together. You like, and depends on how good kids are. Like you form groups like here, like you become friends and you study. There's never like a competition. However, when it's a when you enter, like let's say you enter like even when I entered my school, it was a selective school. I had to take exams to get in. So you compete against others who are trying to get in, right? So you need to be better than others in order to get in if you want to get in. And then get in the university, same story. The universities had the system, it was called a threshold score. So that score was composed of your GPA from your high school diploma and exams that you take, entrance exams, and each institution had their own exams. So like if you, like, let's say if you don't pass exams to the institution, you lost a year. You can only go again back and try somewhere else or in the same place in a year. And the way it worked was that, let's say you graduated, like I graduated my school as a valedictorian, right? As a valedictorian, I was supposed to get into university without any exams. However, because I had a very anti-Semitic history teacher who was, as we learned later, also working for KGB, he made sure that in my transcripts, my behavior was not excellent, but it was good. And that was considered to be below requirement. And so I was not allowed to enter university without exams. And then there was like different like levels, but anyway, to make it short, like you compete, right? Because everybody who took exams, the scores counted, and then there is only 300 spots. That's it. So they look 300 first 300, and those people go in, and then they cut off. And then the same happens like when you graduate. So because it was a communist or socialist system, the government was the job provider, right? We didn't have private companies or anything. The government says 300 jobs to the university, and there are 300 graduates. They rank you based on your GPA. The first person has 300 choices. The last person has whatever left, right?
Mm.
And so you do want to be at the top, so you have choices, because the last person on that list would go to Siberia, somewhere underground radio station, and you're required to work for 3 years for the government because you got free education. You cannot change your job. And if you're first, you have choices like graduate school or research institution and so on. That's a system that was put in place. However, it's ideal system, right? But because I was Jewish, it didn't count for me. Like I was valedictorian of my university class as well, but I was pretty much told that I cannot go to graduate school because I'm Jewish. And then I went to talk to research institution. I wanted to work on a top research institution in physics in my city. They told me that if I were boy Jewish, they would take me, and if I were a girl non-Jewish, they would take me. But the two of those together was too much. And so I ended up working for a person at the Technological Institute for free for a year and a half. Because he told me if I do some work for him, then he'll start paying me. Like I will be an official, like a roster, whatever you call it, an official employee of record. And I cannot have children during that time, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of restrictions. And I had to write a book for him, which I did. And he at least put my name on the book, not only his. So I do have a book which was published in 1987, which was a year after I graduated from the university. And after that, he gave me like already official job, but that was job paid me less than my scholarship that I was getting from the government for studying like without any B's. Like I only had straight A's in my whole 6 years of studies. So that's where these things come when you have those milestones in your life, like transitional. While I was at the university, there were no competition. We all were working together. We collaborated and everything, and we learned together. But at the moments of transitions, like from high school, from middle, it wasn't middle, but like let's say middle school, right, to that specialized high school, there was a transition. You compete. From high school to university, you compete. From university to get a job, you compete.
So, quick question. Because I think the model that you had said earlier about the free education, what ends up happening is you have to then work 3 years, you said, for the
Mm-hmm.
government, and is what you study based on what you can then do for the government in those three
Yes,
years?
absolutely.
So, so what happens? So after those 3 years, do you continue to work for the government or do you then switch to something else?
Well, if all jobs are government jobs, right? At the time when we were
Hmm.
there was no private thing. Everything was like state or government, federal, whatever word we could use. So these 3 years is like both sides of the medal. Your guaranteed job. Like a lot of people right now, right, looking for a job, young people with degrees and they can't find a job. you guaranteed a job. Like, and nobody can fire you for 3 years from that job, whatever you do. But the other part, if you didn't get a good job because of whatever circumstances, then you cannot leave that job. You have to stay there. So after 3 years, depending on your job, if it's something that you love, you stay there. And if you have a career there, right, and you have a path to go, you stay there. Or you find, if it's not what you like, and what you hated for the 3 years, then you find something else, or you try to find something else. But then nobody guarantees it. You just need to find a job.
And you're paid the same amount or different amounts based on what you do?
You pay different amounts based on what you do. Like there are different jobs, and also based on your level, right? Like people with PhDs, for example, had immediately bump in their salaries, even if they stayed at the same job. Uh, the entry level positions, again, it depends. Like I was supposed to be the research physicist, or let's say assistant professor. Like that was my education. But and I went into higher education to work, right? But the position I got was not research scientist or assistant professor. It was engineer, which was not my profession, not what I was studying for. But it was paid less than, let's say, assistant professor. So, but at that point, I was happy to have a job.
Yeah. I guess what I am, did you feel like there was a deep connection between everyone who was learning and to the Soviet Union as a whole? So everyone was excited in some ways to contribute to the collective, or was it still just like, I want my money to do the things for me?
Well, I think it's very personal. There are people who were excited and very patriotic. I think I was very patriotic until up to a particular moment. And then there are people who were more egocentric and wanted just to get. But in Soviet Union, it's like at that time, if you wanted just to have money, like and really a lot of money, you shouldn't go to education, higher education. The people should have gone to become plumbers or working in a store, because this or drive a bus. These were higher paid jobs than engineer job. Like so, it was not like your salary was within your profession, the salary was proportional to your experience and degrees, right? But outside of your profession, we had some professional, like some jobs that were not proportional to how much education you got. Well, the same happens in the United States, and we know that, right? So it's
Hmm.
not like a new thing. Um, but if you did go to the higher education institution, usually it's because you wanted to do like more intellectual work
Hmm.
compared to like physical labor work, which sometimes paid more.
Hmm. Interesting. And so, I mean, thanks for laying all of this out because I think it's really interesting. So, when you then came to the US, I think you said in 1991, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, how did you kind of get transition a little bit into education as well, into thinking about education?
Okay, so Gotham, you ask questions which like all long answers, you know.
Yeah.
So I was at University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, and it was a temporary position. And in order to in order to bring a family, right, you need to have a permanent position. And my position was temporary. It was in physics, in physics department, not quite like my narrow physics topic, but still it was in physics, right?
This was in Arkansas.
Yeah, in Fayetteville. So I was there for a year, and I needed to have my family over, right? I needed to figure out like how I can bring my family over. And after understanding the system here, it was clear that it will be years and years of postdocs before I can get permanent position. And also that I was coming from one of the top institution in my country, right? And I wanted to be somewhere like also like meaningful for me, like to do meaningful job for me. But the priority was family at that point. And so what happened is that after 1 year at Fayetteville, my husband came, right? And he was able to find a job in Little Rock. And so I had to move from that university and find a job in Little Rock. And then they had like this opening for someone going on sabbatical at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And now it was not even physics, it was like semiconductors. But my education allowed me to transition to that. I, I think I had a very good, solid foundational education that allowed me to transition between different areas. And but there was still temporary job, and my husband was supposed to get a permanent job, but then the company that hired him lost a bid on a grant, I mean, a bid on a contract from the government. And so they told him it's a temporary job too. So now both of us have temporary job and we have children in Russia. And so, and my job was only for 1 year. So I started looking, and then this opportunity came. Like the Arkansas decided to open a residential school for gifted children in like Arkansas School for Mathematics and Sciences. And they were looking for a physics teacher. And physics is not a required subject in the United States. You probably know that, like compared to, let's say, Russia or Soviet Union. And so that many people, not that many people go to study physics. So they had a very hard time to find just a physics teacher for the school. And I applied. And I'm coming from the specialized school, right? Of physics, very strong physics background, of PhD in physics. And so they not only offered me a job, they offered me a department chair position at that school. And that was permanent job. And as soon as I got that job, we were able to bring our daughters. And for me, it was like, okay, that's a temporary thing. I'm just gonna work here for a little bit so we can, settle down, like get our feet on the ground, and then I'll find what I really want to do, research and physics. But I fell in love with that job. Like I really loved working with high schoolers and see immediate impact, like, and also see immediate impact on the girls because in Russia it was not a big deal, like in terms of education when you're studying, nobody says, oh, girls this, boys this. When here apparently like there's such a discouragement from STEM careers for girls compared for the boys. And so for them, seeing that the most advanced physics is taught by a female who has PhD in theoretical mathematical physics was extremely important impact. And they actually, a lot of my former students told me that. So, so I was at Arkansas School for Math and Sciences for 5 years. And we built that school. It was a really great experience. I had colleagues who were, in a sense, mentors, who were, experienced teachers. So I had my like guts kind of intuition and also my experience in a high school where I had excellent teachers, so I knew what good teaching looked like, but I also had apparently some intuition and natural ways of doing things in a classroom without any education background, I mean background in education, right? And so it was good, like, and I even got like few awards like for excellence in teaching at a national level, but it was, I think, combination of my background as a kid, my love for learning, but also mentors, that my colleagues who kind of supported me and helped me like to become better and better. And so that's how it started, right? So I started, and I was a high school teacher in physics. um, and then it was time when we realized that we kind of outgrew our environment, like reach both of us. My husband has PhD in chemical engineering, by the way. So both of us felt like we outgrew where we live and we want our children to have more opportunities. And we also had two more kids in Arkansas, two boys. So we wanted for them to have more opportunities and better education, and we decided to move to Northeast. And plus, at that time, my family started to consider immigrating to the United States. My immediate family, like my brothers and my parents. And so we started looking for a place where they can also have opportunities. And Arkansas was not the place where, like, in terms of jobs, like, and everything. And so I was, I found a job in a private school in New Jersey, and we all moved. And as I was doing things, I was encouraged in this private school by administration, by my department chair. I came as a math physics instructor to that school. They needed for me to teach both because they needed someone to teach upper level mathematics. They had some kids coming. It was a boarding school, so there were kids coming from all over the world, right? a lot of international students, and they were coming with much stronger mathematics background, and the school didn't have teachers who could teach them like BC calculus, linear algebra, complex analysis, differential equations, like you're not your typical high school subjects, but more of a college level. But they had kids who would take BC calculus in ninth grade. They needed 3 more years of mathematics. So I was teaching all those subjects and nobody else could. But I also taught like physics, right? And I taught AP physics, like both levels and even beyond. And so that was an environment where my family came and they were able to find jobs in Northeast. And but I was also encouraged by my colleagues and my supervisors to do writing about those things. So like to prepare materials. So I started to develop curriculum materials, right? Well, I was developing them, but I started to put them together. And then I started to do workshops and going to the conferences. And I was always feeling really bad about leaving my students, because like nobody can sub for you. Like I don't, subs don't work the same way because you have to reteach them anyway. Like what I do, nobody can, right? Like kind of like, and I'm sure every teacher thinks the same way, like every good teacher at least. And so as I started to do all that work, I was taken away from my classroom, but I was also like more and more thinking about if I'm impacting teachers, maybe I should be moving on and working with teachers so that there are more students who could be impacted by like different things. And my background as a researcher and scientist in mathematics, because being a theoretical physicist, it's also like very strong mathematics. Like kind of combination of those gave me chances to be very creative in terms of school curriculum, like bringing things like I have two books about science experiments for teaching mathematics. Uh, so, for example, I mean more than two, like, but the two books which specifically called Science Experiments for Teaching Calculus, Science Experiments for Teaching Pre-Calculus. So that was the transition to the education and working with teachers. Like again, time came to move on to next level in a sense to work with teachers so the teachers can affect more students.
So when you were teaching, were you also doing research or you're teaching full time?
I was teaching full time. I couldn't do physics research. Well, in the way, like I would say this way, there's two levels here. One is I worked with students who were doing research, and my students actually did very, I would say, high level for high school students, high level research. Like I have students who published as high schoolers, like we co-published. I had students who won like places at International Science Fair or Westinghouse Awards, right? Like the Science Talent Searches. So, in other words, they were indeed doing research that was accessible to them, but at a high level and which was acknowledged. So, in that sense, I was still in research, but more as a mentor for my students. But when I would consider curriculum development and trying it out in the classroom and adjusting its action research in education. So, in that sense, I was doing research, but not in physics, but in education when I was
Mhm.
teaching. But teaching is very busy work, like between preps, between grading, and like it's not 9 to 5 job. So I was doing all of this, but then all my writing happened in the summer. So like the two books I wrote while I was high school teaching, right? It was written in the summer. But the materials were tested and developed as I was teaching.
And so then you started thinking a lot about the preparation of teachers. And
Yes.
is that when you went back to school? Is that when you went back to Columbia or went to
Well, I
Columbia?
first worked at CUNY, City University of New York, for 15 years. That's so I actually, from high school, that's where I went. At CUNY, there is a Discovery Institute. It's a university institute that focuses on preparation of teachers and professional development of teachers. And they were looking for like associate director, and I applied, and I got a job. Like I don't know how that happened, but it happened. And when I got the job, they also said it comes a faculty position as associate professor, and they pretty much, based on my background, offered me three departments: physics, mathematics, or education. And my thought was, if I'm already doing work with teachers, it makes no sense to do separate research from what my job will be. And so I chose education department. So I was teaching at education department, but not like full time, but part time. It was a full time faculty position, but it was, in college it's called release time. Like when you work with like some administrative role, they like it's almost like the university buys your time from your department so you can do administrative work. And so I was only teaching one course a semester and writing grants. We had a budget of about close to $10 million a year in grants, purely grant funded. So my job was constantly raise funds, and we had grants from like federal grants, we had private grants, state grants. We worked with approximately 500 K through 12 teachers per year, providing professional development to them in their students also. And the programs were really like across the board to prepare teachers, so to provide like funds for the students who want to become teachers, as well as to teachers who were already in the classroom to provide them professional development, pedagogy on content. So there was like a lot, a lot of things, a lot of grants going on at the same time, like 15, 16 grants at the same time. So
Wow. And so a lot of your focus on teacher preparation was on what? Like developing a certain sense of competency, or was it in student relations? Like is it kind of in general?
all over,
Yeah.
all over. Like at that point, like right now it's a little more focused, but at that point, when I was a director of the institute, we wanted to reach as many, as many teachers as possible and also provide quality education. So we had for high school, like one grant was specifically on um, for teachers to understand pedagogy of discovery learning and inquiry-based learning. So it was like a curriculum design and development, co-design of the teachers to help them to become more inquiry-based in the classrooms, right? So that it's not purely direct instruction, but to bring some, experiences for students were more open-ended and more like engaging. Then we had another program where the focus was on getting kids, underrepresented kids into college. It was from Federal Department of Education. So that program was working with the teachers to support students from underrepresented populations, and which means that we also engaged local like cultural communities, like society, groups, churches, the the parent organizations. So it was like a collaborative like involvement. And so we also supported parents. For example, in that grant, we provided, there was a lot of immigrants. So we provided language instruction for parents and financial like instruction for parents. But we also provided education for parents for them to realize that their kids deserve and should be in and can go to college, because most of those families never even considered that option for their children. And then we provided support for the teachers in the classrooms, and for that we engaged students who didn't know whether they want to be teachers or not, and we paid them like stipends to go and be mentors for the kids in the classroom and support kids when they struggle, like working with small groups or one-to-one in like math and science and language. And also that helped the students to decide whether teaching is for them or not for them. But it was extra cash for the students because it was extra like a job. So that was
Mm.
another grant. And then we had a whole grant on technology, where we provided teachers with knowledge of how to integrate technology and into their classrooms. And so that was another one. And then there was a grant on getting high schoolers who are above the average to take courses at a college and then transfer those college credits towards their, college education. So as I said, like there's a lot of different ones at
And
that
so
point.
your task was after getting those grants to research how effective those policies were or
Yes, so
efforts?
like provide like a research and evaluation of the programs as well. So collecting data, like working on see what works, what doesn't work. But also my role was to write those grants. Like as a PI or co-PI, like I worked. We had like two, three people in who were writing grants. So it's writing, it's submitting, is getting rejected and submitting again.
Hmm.
So that was like a whole process. And then also like I was part of working with our staff. We had like about 15 people, part-time staff, to like educate our educators who were supposed to provide professional development. So that was on us, right? Or to develop curriculum, or to develop professional development workshops like outlines and agendas. So that was also part. And then the one part which was also necessary, it's like reaching out to administration, to legislation, like to for supporting those programs and stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, this journey has been so long, and I feel like there's been so much that you've must have experienced and learned. I would just, I mean, in this is a big question, but I don't know how else to succinctly ask it. But if you could take a certain belief that you've had starting from when you were teaching, could you maybe identify a very core belief that you've had that's like changed over all these experiences? Like what is one of the things that all this experience has maybe taught you about education, um,
Huh.
broadly speaking, that has really changed over the years?
It's interesting. I'm thinking like some of my core beliefs are still there, what they were, because I think I was fortunate to have an amazing people in my education journey, like great teachers at all levels, from elementary school to high school to university level. So I always believe that education needs to be engaging, inquisitive, rigorous, but accessible. And that my belief always was that it's not about us coming down to the student levels, but it's about us educators bringing students up to the level where they need to be. And I'm trying to think like what changed. I mean, what we do changed, right? Or we have technology, right? We have new like views of the world, and but the core beliefs, I don't think they changed.
Mm.
I don't think so.
Yeah. I guess I'm curious because I think because you have such a, I think when we think about math and physics in general, what have you found to be the like core reason of why we do like why do we do math? Why do we do physics?
Okay, so mathematics, right? For me, mathematics is like a gymnastics of the brain. This is the probably one the most important discipline to develop reasoning, thinking, critical thinking, logical. I mean, and don't get me wrong, you can develop critical thinking in humanities, and but in mathematics, it's a system which is built on particular rules, right? And ways that you have to have a logic, and you have to justify everything. And unfortunately, that's not enough. Like in what we see around, people just say things, don't justify. Like if they don't have a strong mathematics education, good mathematics education, not what mathematics is called here mathematics, and most like public schools, especially at elementary school level, here mathematics perceived to be computations. Computation is not mathematics. I don't think many people in the United States understand what mathematics really is, because they judge about mathematics based on their school mathematics experience, which most of the time wasn't good. But mathematics is a very different thing. Mathematics is beautiful. Mathematics is exciting. Mathematics is aesthetical. Like something what really is right also needs to be very beautiful. Like in mathematics, if your formula is awkward and it not pleasant to look at, it means it's not a good formula. So that's so in my view, like if we were teaching mathematics correctly, like I believe it should be taught, everybody would love it, because it's not about crunching numbers or memorizing algorithms. It's really about this search for beauty and search for, like, it's like solving a puzzle in a sense. And I think that's what got me into mathematics, because I had good teachers and I had those extracurricular things that kind of opened me up to this beauty and this, like it's like for many kids video games. in a sense. You fail, right? You fail a level and you still go back and you try again and try new things. That's exactly what for me was mathematics. And then that's what physics became. But what made why physics is so important, because physics, even though in this country physics is taught last because it's assumed to be only for elite and not difficult, in reality physics is the simplest science. Because if you know mathematics, physics helps you to understand the world around you. Biology and chemistry are way more complex because you cannot see a lot of things. So you have to kind of imagine and kind of, like, you can't see molecules, you can't see like a reaction. I mean, you see results, right? But you don't see all the details. In physics, especially in mechanics, right? Even in optics, like you see things, you see exactly what's happening. So you can, physics helps you to really explain and understand what is happening if you do this or that. And I think that's why in Russia, like for example, physics was the first subject. You start physics like in sixth grade, and you learn it spiral. It's a spiral curriculum. You learn it all the way through your graduation, and every time you go through the same concepts but deeper level because you learn more and more math. And so you really get to know and understand everything, and you start with conceptual level and you deepen and deepen and deepen your knowledge, because now you can put more and more mathematics, means you can go in more serious, right? Like considerations and so on. Here, there's no physics for most kids. They never take it. And then they go to college and they never take it. They don't know what it is. Everybody just knows E equals MC squared. No, that's it. And it, so and I think that's actually very sad, because it's like missing out on a beautiful song, or missing out on, you know, a beautiful painting, or a great book. Uh, and and that's the main two reasons. Mathematics teaches you like the systematic thinking that very hard to get anywhere else. And physics teaches you about the world around you and understanding it and understanding cause effect and what could happen. And that's why it's extremely important. But if it's taught wrong, then it's a damage. It hinders all of that.
Yeah. What have you seen to be the kind of consequence of us not really covering and exploring physics?
Well, the people who learn chemistry and biology don't fully understand them either, because the physics is a foundation for chemistry, and physics and chemistry foundation for biology. So, and then we have people who don't understand science, and now we are in what, like a lot of mess of climate, with health, with just about anything, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been interesting. This season has been I have surprisingly spoken to a lot of people who think deeply about curriculum, and it's been making me really have to kind of think at its core. So I studied mathematics in undergrad too, and it was interesting because I think the way you described it has been how I often talk about my experience with math, and how my experience with math at the undergrad level was so different than anything I'd ever done before, where it became this extremely beautiful process of understanding reasoning, of putting together ways of understanding things that forever just seemed like it was just it's like this because it's like this, and then you learn the kind of magic that exists behind it, and it's a whole different process. But I think what you're saying is super interesting, because the ways in which we go about thinking is the part that sometimes gets missed out when we don't fully explore physics, for example, or even mathematics. Because I think even if I was able to regurgitate a bunch of facts at you, my science background has always been extremely weak. And I feel like one of the consequences of that is that when it comes to understanding reasoning itself, like the scientific method and how we go about knowing things about this universe, I actually have no idea how that process works. So you could tell me that the earth isn't flat, but I wouldn't actually know how to tell you that it's round. And if so, if someone tells me it's flat, I just have to be like, well, you're really ridiculous for thinking that, because this book clearly doesn't say that. But real science is understanding why we know the things that we know, and how do we get to that point, not just reading sentences and memorizing them. And I feel like that process of reasoning is something that I have always noticed. Okay, like I don't actually know why we know these things. I was actually just looking at a tree, And I was like, how did we actually figure out about photosynthesis? I mean, what a crazy, like I know that I know it's happening because I read it in a book, but I actually have no idea how we figured that out. How, I mean, it's fascinating. We've looked at trees and we figured this really fundamental thing where you easily can go your life never having to actually know how those processes actually work. And so it's something I want to be a lot more intentional about in my life. Every time I see a scientific topic or something to understand how did we actually how did we figure out that that is the case? Because I think that's a really key piece of science.
Of course. And that's what we call scientific discovery, right? But if you think about it like deeply, right, the fact that we don't teach math or science, I would say, well, like to be like diplomatic, well enough for everyone, and majority of our children in the country do not get that good education, we see consequences. We see how right now, right, science is not valued, and a lot of decisions are made that impact our society, like as I said, our health, our climate. Uh, then and that affects everyone. But if and I'm even like comparing, like look at us here in the United States and decisions that are made, and look at the Europe, right, which has a strong background education in schools, stronger, I would say, and very different approach in that country, right, of how people like conscious every not even I'm not talking politicians, but people like regular people who are much more conscious about environment that we are here. I have a niece who came from Europe for visit, right? And she was shocked that we still have plastic bags here. She said, in Europe, you will never find them anywhere, right? Or like in Europe, they have those on bottles, right? Cups attached so that they're not just everywhere, like as a trash. She was shocked of so many things that just like she just couldn't even understand what's going on because it was her first trip to the United States because of the way people treat everything in Europe, right? In terms of environment and in terms of preserving natural resources and so on. But you need to understand, for example, that natural resources are not there forever, right? But we can exhaust them. You need to understand the impact of burning coal on the atmosphere and not just listen to like ideas about big hawks or whatever else. In order to understand, you need to have that scientific background first, and you also need to have that reasoning and critical thinking skills so that you can deduct things, you can think through and build like sequence of cause effect, like links, like relationships that lead you to a reasonable like consequences. And people don't do that here because the way we teach. And and I guess that's very one of my missions per se, my personal mission in terms of teacher preparation, to bring that understanding of inquiry, cause effect relations, reasoning. Like I want my students who want to become teachers to bring that to their classrooms, and I want them to really learn how to do that in a classroom so that we reach out to like as many children as possible to develop like conscientious consumers, conscientious citizens, people who have like responsibilities and feel responsible not just for themselves but for the environment because of all of us depend on it. So
Yeah. I mean, I feel like when we think about reasoning, it seems that every single subject can approach reasoning through a different lens. So English, for example, or just language, for example, can also really teach reasoning just through a very different framework than maybe science
absolutely.
does, than what math does.
The difference is that in English, like you can read a novel, right? And you can have very different perspectives, and none of them would be wrong because depending on the lens you're looking through, right, you will have a different outputs. But in mathematics, you have axiomatic system, you have like rules, right? And so reasoning in mathematics is very logical and it needs to be based on something that has been proved. In English, you don't prove things. You express your own, like you may have your own lens, and then through that lens, you can reach different kind of conclusions. And that is a reasoning and that's logical, but you can start anywhere. And in mathematics, we have facts. And in science, that's what's different about science. Science is based on real things that are out there, right? And you start with something that we already know, and you build your new knowledge based on what's already been known, and you may still adjust, like we in science, right? New facts, new discoveries can lead to changes in our understanding of particular phenomena, right, and the particular laws, and expand them. But whatever was true doesn't just become false. Usually it's just expanded. Like if we think about physics, Newton came up with classical mechanics, and you probably learned in the school about Newton's laws, right? And
Hmm.
everything worked perfectly until our technology, our like abilities to be faster, to be to be faster pretty much, showed that it's not always working. Like if we move too fast or close to speed of light, and that's where special relativity came into place. But special relativity, which talks about what happens in space and of motion at a very high speeds, still work if you reduce that speed to regular speeds that we're experiencing on Earth, like even airplane speeds. It becomes Newton's laws. So in other words, it's not like a brand new theory. It expands what we have, and that's how science
Mm.
works. And so it's still the same, like laws work, but now we understand these laws work with these specific conditions, right? If speeds are much less than speed of light, but as soon as we're approaching speed of light, these laws become more complex.
Yeah. I guess maybe as we start wrapping this conversation up, one point I think that's really important is that I think schools are really fascinating because there's a culture that underlies what subjects we seem to prioritize and ways of thinking that we seem to prioritize. And as you shared, and I think many people share and feel, this kind of relationship with STEM particularly feels like it's very split in this country, where there's a segment of the population that understands the power of it, its ability to find you professions, the ability for you to develop your reasoning, and STEM is really valued. And then there's also a large percent of the population where STEM feels kind of out of touch. It feels something that's very difficult, complex, nuanced, out of the thing that I can do. So it feels like what needs to sometimes happen to kind of bring this conversation back into the main discourse is to change the relationship we have with STEM fundamentally. How do you feel like that can happen? Can it?
It can. It happened once in the United States when Sputnik came in the Soviet
Yeah.
Union, and then all the energy and forces, right? Everything was thrown into we need to improve STEM education. It definitely can happen, but I think it needs to be conversation between all stakeholders, and not just like somebody decides something for somebody else. One second, we need to start valuing education. This country does not really value education. You can see that the teachers are getting paid less salaries than possible. That very often people go to teaching profession by remainder factor, like, oh, I can't get to medical school, or I can't get to engineering, so let me go to teaching, right? We need to make this profession to be prestigious, because education, like schools, right? Like our children is our largest investment ever, and we don't value them. We don't value education. So change our perspective about what education is and why it is important to have an education, to like become informed citizens, to contribute to the society at all levels. It doesn't mean everybody has to go to college, but we need to make sure that people are educated to understand and to better their own lives as well. One. Second, right now our schools are institutions that were formed, what, 200 years ago, 300. It didn't change, but life changed completely. So our schools are so far away from real world that students don't value like schools, unless it's like like always straight A students who just do whatever they're told because they were told by their parents, and like that's what you need to do. But it's not working for majority of our students, and so education's becoming, and a STEM is more structured in a sense than, let's say, humanities. So it's harder if you don't have a background. Like if you can read, like new novel. You don't need to know what you read in the seventh grade in order to be able to read in the ninth grade, right? Still, you need some skills to analyze, but in STEM, it's like you need to build a background in order to go to the next level. And if you miss that for whatever reasons, like you had a bad teacher, you moved from one state to another, and each state has their own rules. So like you move from fifth grade to sixth grade, from southern state to northern state, and then suddenly you missed a whole year of mathematics, and then you're behind, and then you're frustrated, and nobody's like doing anything about it. So this we don't have nationalized curriculum, and I think that hurts us in terms of STEM a lot. And we don't have opportunities for students to really catch up. And then we need to change how we teach. Right now, the school is focused on product. All our teachers teaching to the test, and all the tests that align to the standards. The standards all about facts and basic like routine skills that students need to know. It's not what the real world needs, right? And we always hear about how like industries or like research, anybody saying like, oh, the people come from universities and they're still not prepared. We have to reteach them, right? But that's a huge systemic change, and how it could happen, I don't know, because it needs to be at a much larger like level than just you, me, or like even a whole university cannot change things. We have some examples. We have some schools who went interdisciplinary, right? And who don't give grades, but value like on a more like a narrative assessment of what students are doing, and the students working with thematic curriculum where they solve problems. I have extracurricular examples where students are engaged, like in Philadelphia, like one teacher created this club where kids were building cars, like race cars, and based on that learned like so much STEM, way more than they would learn in a separate physics or mathematics or chemistry class, because they were really engaged and they had to learn all of that. And then they even competed against like BMW and Volvo. So there are like those examples around our country where innovative teachers take it in their hands and create environments where students actually love STEM and appreciate STEM and learn, but it needs to be different, and it needs to be more systemic than just individual teachers who take it upon themselves.
Hmm. I mean, this was a phenomenal conversation. I mean, I just feel like the journey that we've taken over the last hour, I mean, has been so refreshing for me, and I feel like I there's so much more I want to ask you and talk to you about, and I'd love to have you on again because I think really identifying there's so many layers to this. We briefly touched on a lot of it, but first identifying what really is the value and purpose of first knowledge as a whole, and then coming down to mathematics and science and physics in particular, and then moving into what does that look like when we try to standardize or put that into a curriculum that has to now serve millions and millions of students across a very vast country, and then understanding how do we then prepare teachers, and then understanding how, it's a whole kind of pipeline. And I feel like you've done so much work in thinking about that, and had the experience both of being a teacher, a scientist, and then also a researcher. So I feel like you're positioned in a really unique way to understand this pipeline really differently than anyone who's just focused and experted just one of those. So thank you so much for everything you've shared today.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I want to say thank you. Yeah. No, and I wanted to say thank you all for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you have, you can find more of our show on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and on our website, reeducated.org. If you've been really enjoying the work that we've been doing, you can also support us on Patreon. This work could not be done without the support of many of you. I hope you're having a great week, and as per usual, stay re-educated.